Okay, today we continue our idea of using arrays, but before I go on to the next concept, what I want to do is do a little recap of what we covered in the last program, and in particular the average, because obviously it's not just useful to just load in arrays and print them out. Who cares? What you want to do with them is do something useful with them, work out averages, work out the highest mark, the lowest mark, and eventually do some neat stuff like move objects across the screen using arrays. And you actually do that with arrays, and we will later on in the course. Now, when we finished off the last video, we were working the average out, and I want to show you maybe a simpler way. For some students, they still don't get that idea of method, so this was kind of like very advanced. So instead of doing it that way, you could have done it another way. Just to review, this was basically asking the person, give me your name, give me your mark, give me your name, give me your mark, and we store them into these arrays. Now after you say that a million times and you're done, outside of the main loop, you can work out the average. And here is another way to work out the average. So you could have said, you know what, we're going to work out a person's average, so we're going to have something called double average, and we'll start it off at 0. And we're going to need a total to work out the average, so we'll go double total, and we'll start that off at 0, and we're ready to go. Now, the most important idea with arrays is that once you have them in the computer's brain, that's it. All you do now is do for loops. So if you have 1,000 things in the computer's brain, we don't have to write 1,000 lines. You go like this. You go for integer I equals 1, I less than or equal to. Now you don't know how many you have, okay? But you let the computer count for you, right? So as you were doing it, the computer was remembering how many you have right there. So you go like that. You write down counter, and then you're going up by ones. And then you go squiggly line, squiggly line. Now in between, what you do is you add up all the marks. So you go total equals total plus. Now where are the marks? The marks are right there. Okay? So you go like this. You go student mark square bracket. Now you don't say counter. Counter was there. But here, our kind of counter, if you want to think of it that way, is the letter I. That's making us go up by 1, 2, 3. So you put I in the square bracket. And that's it. That adds up all the marks. Then what you do to work out the average, obviously, is you take the total and you divide it by the counter. Now where's the counter? Counter is right there, because that's the number of marks you have. And that'll work out your average. And then what you could do in a list box, a message box, whatever you wanted to do, is have like something like message box dot show the average is, and then you would write down average dot to string, and then if you wanted to, because sometimes averages could be like decimals, right? You could write it like this. Okay, so maybe that's easier for you to understand. This is kind of like the cooler way. This is calling a method. You're passing down to it some information, and it's working out the average, and it sort of looks the same. Like, look at, there's the for loop that does the totals. There it is, but it's using these parameters, these things in the bracket, and then you're dividing it by u, which is the counter. So maybe that's kind of weird for you. So I thought, okay, let's try it again, and let's do it kind of a simpler way, which is more than fine for me on the test. Now, I do notice that I should have another bracket there if you guys are watching this. Okay, so that's a little recap of what we did last video to show you the introduction to arrays. Now today what we're going to do is continue with this idea of arrays and start doing some applications that would be almost impossible to do without arrays. Like after you've got this list of people's names or marks or whatever, you can print them out in reverse order. It doesn't take 20 lines to do it, you still just do it with a loop. How about working out the highest mark or the lowest mark? There's kind of a cool way to do that, and you do that a lot in computer programming. So let's go and do that now. So let me just save this first of all, and take a look at the next stuff. So this next stuff is what we call intermediate problems. So if you're wondering where I'm getting them from, and then there's a program in there called Simple Array Intermediate, and we'll load it in. Okay, so this one is going to review some basic ideas plus introduce the idea of figuring out who got the highest mark or the lowest mark. So let me just give you a sample run first so you have an idea how this is going to work. So let's go with grades again, because we did that last time. Do you have any entries? Yes. I'll type in my name, I'll type in my mark, and then I'll type in another person, and I'll type in their mark, and then I'll do one more person, and I'll type in their mark. Okay, and I don't want to do this anymore. Now watch what happens. I show you the original people. Okay, those are the 3 people that I typed in and their marks. Then I show you them in reverse order. All right, and then here's the cool stuff. This is the most important part of today's lesson. The highest mark, it figured it out. It was 90, and it was by person KK. Perfect. Okay, so what we're going to try to do today is that kind of thing. Now, where would you ever use this? Well, when you do your games, maybe you'll want to figure out who got the highest score in your game and then keep track of them in a data file. So you will use arrays there to do that for your game. All right. The second example, I don't actually press anything. I just press this button and it uses a data file. So in this one, I've got stored in the computer a bunch of days and the temperature that day. And I work out the average temperature and then the lowest temperature, which is cool, right? So now you're starting to see more practical applications of arrays. Okay, let's take a look at each one and see how I did it. So the first one is called grades, and look what I did. I did it at the very top. I didn't do it inside the squiggly brackets. So when you tell the world about the array at the top, the whole world knows about them. So first of all, I don't know how many students I'm going to have. So again, like last time, I leave room for up to 99 students. See, that's always one more than what you have, right? And I had that counter going. So we're ready to go. So now I call data entry. So this is, I'm using a method. You got to get used to it. I know in the last example I said if you didn't like the cool way, which is with methods, then I gave you a simple way. But you got to try to get used to this idea with methods. So instead of me having a whole bunch of junk there, I'm just going to have a word, data entry. So then data entry goes down here. And you've seen this now for the 3rd time. This is how you use inputs to take a person's name and mark and store it into an array. All right, I'm not going to cover this again. This is about the 3rd time. It's exactly word for word like we just did. And this is the kind of thing you're going to get in the test. So make sure you print this program out and you do the same idea. Okay, so after you've gone through this, 7, 8, 9, 10, how many students you have, we have stored in the computer's brain all these students' names and all these students' marks. So what do we do after that? Well, what I'm going to teach you today is how to do things like print them out in reverse order, or print them out and tell me who got the highest one. So let's do this first. Display. That's just a regular method. Let's go down to where display is. There it is right there. And all it is a loop. Everything's a loop. Every single question after the first one is a loop that goes from 1 to counter. And this prints out everybody's name and their mark. The next method is called reverse. Okay, so we go down to the bottom. And notice all of these ones right now are void, void. So you go there, you show people what you have, and then that's it. You don't come back with an answer, you just do the answer right where you are. So let's go down here. This is reverse. That means print out everybody backwards. So instead of printing out student 1, 2, 3, print out student 3, 2, 1. So look what I did here. This is how you go backwards. So counter is going to be 3, so we're going to start with 3 and go to 1 and backwards. I minus minus. Okay? Now here's the most important part. The last one is to figure out who got the highest mark. Now look what I do here. This again is a method. Okay? So I call this thing called highest mark. Let's go down to where highest mark is. And here's the trick. So you got these 3 marks, people's names, whatever, okay? And you're trying to figure out who got the biggest one. Well, the trick is start off and say that the biggest is equal to -1, which is kind of stupid, right? So if you're after the biggest mark, why would you make it something stupid like -1? Well, because what's going to happen is I'm going to now go through every single person from number 1 to number 3, because that's what's in the counter. And I'm going to see if that student's mark, so starting off with student number 1, I'm going to see if student number 1, who could have got a 70 or something, is bigger than big. Well, obviously, anybody's mark is going to be bigger than -1, I hope, right? Unless the teacher was really mean to you and took off a whole bunch of marks. So right off the bat, the very first student is going to be bigger than big. So I'm going to take his mark, 60, 70, whatever he got, and it goes into big. All right? But I also want to remember who the guy was. So I, which is student number 1, goes into POS. So we're going to keep track of 2 things: what the biggest mark is and who got it. First guy, second guy, third guy, whoever. Now eventually, when we're finally done this entire loop, we will find the biggest person, because now we'll compare the second person to big. So let's say the second person got a 60 and big is a 70. Well, then we don't do this. We skip it. Now we go to the third guy. Let's say the third guy got a 90. So his mark is bigger than 70. So his mark becomes big, and we remember that he was the third guy. And now when we print it out, we print out big, 90% or whatever the guy's mark was, and we print out the guy's actual name, student square bracket number 3. That could have been John, Charlie, Frank, whoever. Okay, and that's how you find the biggest of a bunch of marks. Now you can use the same idea to find the smallest. All right, and that's what I do with the next example. The next one, if you forgot, does temperatures, but it uses it from a data file. Okay, so I don't ask the person, give me the day, give me the temperature. I just load it in from a data file, and it finds the average and the lowest mark. So let's take a look at how you do that. Okay, so we're down here now, and just like the last one, I try to do it a cool way. I call the data file method first. So this one loads it in off the computer's hard drive. So in the computer's bin folder, I have this file that I typed up in Notepad, and I'm reading 2 things at a time. I'm reading the day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the temperature. Now, if I read nothing, I'm finished. If I haven't read nothing, that means I got to keep going. That means I've read in 1 temperature, and there's the actual day. The second thing I read in is called the temperature, the actual number, right? So I got to convert it. So those 2 lines read in all your information. Okay. After that, I display the temperatures, and I hope as you see me go down to display temperatures, you remember, actually, where is it? It's up here, I guess. Okay, there's display temperatures. Everything you do after the first question is always a for loop. Every single question. So this one goes from 1 to temperature counter. Okay, the other one was just regular counter. You can change the variables whatever you want. And notice that it says day square bracket I, so when it's 1 it goes to 1, and when it's 2 it goes to 2. Okay, now let's work our way down. After that, I print out the average. Now I do it kind of like the cool way. Alright, there's the method average. So somewhere is something called average that I'm going to work out the averages. And surprise, surprise, it's a for loop. Every question after the first one is a for loop. This goes from 1 to temperature counter, and we do the total. If you still don't know this cool way to do totals, I'll do it the other way. Total equals total plus temperature square bracket I. That's the same thing as what I just wrote there. Okay? And then you work out the total and you return it. Alright, so that's a method that returns an answer. Now the last one, and it's kind of like the opposite of the one I just did with you guys. This time we're going to work out the lowest temperature. So you know the one I just did a few minutes ago? That worked out the highest mark. So what I did first is I said, let's make the biggest mark something stupid like -1. Now if we're after the lowest number of something, let's start off and make something stupid the other way around. So watch what I'm going to do. So first of all, I'm after small this time. So why don't I make the temperature 1,000 degrees? Which I guess it could be, but if you want to get even crazier, make it 1,000,000 degrees. It doesn't matter. But just make it something stupid the other way around. Okay? So now what's going to happen is I'm going to go through every single temperature. Alright, and this time I'm going to say, listen, is the first temperature for Sunday or whatever less than 10,000 or 100,000 degrees? Well, I think it will be, right? So you take that first temperature and you copy it into small, and then you store the position. And that's basically how you find the biggest of a bunch of things and the smallest of a bunch of things.